Let's now create our random number, which is going to display to the player so they can compare the number of items inside the image. So this number is going to be one of three things. It's going to be either the correct amount of items, which is displayed in the image, or one higher or one lower. This is so the game is a little bit more challenging, and we're going to do this over in our generate function. At the moment, our generate function is starting to get pretty crowded, so we can outsource all of the code which is responsible for setting our image. So this is grabbing our image container all the way down to append child. Let's cut this out, leaving it in our splice, and we're going to replace this with a function. The function, I'm going to give this a name of setImageSource, and then create this just up at the top. Inside here, we can paste in the contents that we cut from our generate function. But for this function to work, we also need to receive the random image name. So back down to our generate function, we have our random image name here. We can copy this, pass this to our function. And then if we receive this as an argument, this is now available inside of this function to use. Before we go any further, let's save our code and try this in the browser. And everything still works as expected. We can now move on to generating this random number. So let's go down to our generate function. And just below where we set the image source, we can also create a new function which is going to be responsible for creating this number. I'm going to call this generate plus or minus. All of this function is going to do is to either return a value of +1 or -1. We can then use this number to add to our real number to make it more challenging. So let's create this just above inside of a function. So generate plus or minus. This just needs an equals just afterwards here. For this function to return either a +1 or a -1 value, we need to generate two random options. The way we can do this, just like we've looked at earlier, is to use math.random. To give us two separate options or two values, we can multiply this by 2 and then wrap this inside of math.floor. Remember, math.floor will round down our random number, so this will return a value of either 0 or 1. We can store this inside of a constant, which I'm going to call number 0 to 1. We then want to return back a value from this function. So as we just mentioned, number 0 to 1 will either be a 0 or a 1, and the way we can convert this to a +1 or a -1 is to make use of the JavaScript ternary operator. So we can select our constant of number 0 to 1, and we can say if this is equal to 0, we then want to provide an option. The JavaScript ternary operator will allow us to provide two options, whether the value is true or false. So it kind of works just like an if-else statement. So if this expression here is true, so if this is equal to 0, after the question mark, we're then going to return a value of -1. We then add a colon and provide a option if this is going to be false. If this is false, we'll add +1 and return this back from our function. So since this is randomly generated, we'll have a 50-50 chance that this function will return either -1 or +1. And we can now scroll down and store this return value inside of a constant. So let's say plus or minus, and set this to the return value. So now we have either this positive or negative number. We also now need to grab the actual value of items each image contains. The way we can do this, if we scroll up, is to select the property called number of items. We're doing something very similar in this function where we grab the random image name. So let's take a look at this. Just here we are grabbing our image name from a random image. So let's copy this line here, paste this in, and rather than grabbing our random image name, we can now grab the number of items. And also change this constant name to reflect this, so number of items. This now leaves us with all the information we need to generate our display number, just like we see here. we have a value of negative or positive 1, and we also have the correct number 2. So we're now going to use these two values to pass to a function, which is going to generate this display number. Let's create our function, where we're going to pass in our two constants or our two values from above, which is plus or minus and number of items. Scroll up and create our function called generate display number. This time we're receiving two values, and the first one is number of items, and the second one is plus or minus. Inside of our function, we want to do one of two things. We want to either display the real number, or alternatively, we want to display a number which is either one higher or one lower. To choose which one of these options this function is going to take, we need to generate a random number. Just like below here, we're going to generate two random numbers, so between 0 and 1. Store this inside of a constant. I'm going to call this split. And this random number will now allow us to create an if statement to check if this is 0 or 1. So we'll say if the split is equal to 0, this is going to display our real number. And the way we can do this inside of our index page is to find our element, which our value is stored inside. We see this value just here, so we can remove this, and then we can target our element with the ID of number. So we do this with document.getElementById. by ID. Our selector was number, and then set the inner HTML and set this to our number of items, which is passed to our function just above. So this is our correct number, so now we can create a false number. We can say else. So this will be if the split is equal to 1. Just like above, we'll also set the document.getElementById. Select our number. And this is equal to our real number, which is number of items. And then we want to add either a positive one or a negative one to this, which is stored in the value called plus or minus. And let's give this a try in the browser. In fact, it'll be more clear if we just slow this game down. So 3 seconds and reload. See the value of 1. And we seem to have a problem somewhere, so let's go back up to our function. We have a random number between 0 and 1. If it's 0, we'll set the number value to be our number of items. If not, we'll set this to be our number of items, either positive or negative. That seems to be okay, so let's go down to generate display number. I think we just need to pass these around in the correct order. Whoops. Let's try this now. Click on play. So there's 6 people inside of here, and we get the value of 7, so that's 1 higher. This is the correct number of 8. This is 1 higher. We just need to wait for 1 lower, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is this one here. So now we see the correct number of items. We see 1 value higher, and also 1 value lower too. With this now working, we're going to now move on to the next video, and we'll replace the image name.